went straight into carnage. It was constant stabbings, constant slashings, beatings by prison officers.
HMP Glenochil is a mixed category prison in Clackmannanshire, Scotland. The prison houses almost 700 adult offenders. Men held at Glenochil serve sentences for offences ranging from theft to serious drug crimes.
And I remember the guy running out, and I brought the sword down, severed fingers, really badly lacerated his chest, slashed the face, missed an artery by millimetres in his head, nearly killed this guy.
This is Matt from Underworld, Uncut. And this week we're going inside the walls of HMP Glenochil with former prisoner Anthony Gielty. What type of prison is HMP Glenochil?
HM Prison Glenochil is a maximum security prison situated in Clackmannanshire in Scotland, just in between Glasgow and Edinburgh, right in the border, right next to Stirling Castle. A lot of lifers are kept particularly in a maximum security prison, and long-term prisoners, as opposed to different prisons where guys are getting in and getting out in the space of a few months. So I found when I went there, it was almost like the wing I was on was almost a neighbourhood. A lot of guys were, I'm doing 10 years, other guys are doing life. It almost becomes like a neighbourhood. But when trouble kicked off in Glenochil, it was serious. When trouble did go down, it was among the worst. I would describe HMP Glenochil as a mental health ward, almost. The big change coming out of the young offenders institution into the adults was seeing how many were dependent on drugs, seeing everybody everywhere craving, looking for, trying to find a way to get out of the experience of being in prison by psychoactive substances, and I mean anything from heroin to weed to acid to illegal highs, anything. It seemed to be what everybody was going for all the time, and that was quite foreign to me. And there seemed to be a bit of an incentive to be on it, like methadone programs and stuff like that, because people seemed to get extra visits if they were taken. There was so much people on methadone that there would be like a mile of prisoners getting their medication in the morning. We used to call it the Green Mile because of the green liquid they were waiting for, So that was pretty strange.
How common is violence at Glenochil?
There's multiple dominance hierarchies in prison. One's from who wants to be the biggest and the strongest on the wing, to who wants to take control of the drugs that are coming and going on the wing and controlling the sales, to guys who want to be the best at table tennis or be the best at pool. They're all striving to be recognised in their own ways. Big ones are who controls what's coming in and representing your camp. Particularly just now, there's different families that would have their own camps and their own gangs, and as they go in there, they would enforce prison wars within that. They would take out hits within that, and the hierarchies are fluid. But somebody who's at the top of the hierarchy often is a target too, and they're targeted by somebody who's on the smallest rung who's sent to do it. So it's a strange sort of thing. I remember one situation in Glenochil where 21 lockback knives were found hanging on the fence. So that caused a real concern among the prison officers, because if 21 lockback knives were found having been caught on the razor wire, what else was being smuggled in amongst the guys? So this was a place where guys were tooled to the teeth, and when trouble did kick off, it kicked off serious. Like my friend who thought he was just going for a bare knuckle fight with a guy in a cell was grabbed from behind and stabbed multiple times. But like I said, that was the thing about Glenochil. When trouble did happen, it was really serious. I remember that. So I remember one guy nearly lost his two eyes. We were at the gym one day. Yeah, two guys went for a square go in the showers, which is out the way of the cameras. And these were big guys, big strong gym rats. And I remember one guy just coming out, and his eyes were just tore, like almost hanging down here, and the tear marks from just on his face. And I remember seeing him in the work parties every time, looking past, and I managed to chat to him over a game of cards, and he was like, "Man, I'm just so thankful I've still got my eyes." Man, not just a fight, but a fight where somebody would want to rip another man's eyes out. Prison violence won't just be because an argument's erupted or a difficulty's happened or a breakdown in relations has happened on the wing. Often violence and retaliations are prescribed for guys going in, having a gang warfare with somebody on the outside perpetuates it on the inside. They then have to retaliate. Often attacks are dictated to from the outside. So somebody's family does something on the outside, a prisoner on the inside who can be got is made an example of, or something that happened on the outside needs to be finished on the inside as guys get together. But often slights, insults, threats, abuse, the standard thing for guys. Things that can be used within prison as tools is anything that can be broken or isn't pinned down. Seen chairs being broken off into chair legs, pool balls, pool cues. Remember during one kick-off, it became really important to get to recreation first, to secure the pool balls, to secure the pool, but anything that could be done. Any means of inflicting injuries just became determined by what was available.
How do drugs affect people in prison?
Drugs seriously affect the dynamics of prison. I would say for 80% of prisoners, their day revolves around how to get a psychoactive substance to get them to escape the monotony of everyday life. And I mean, guys would be trying to smoke, like guys who'd just come in and were leaving serious drug habits would be trying to smoke paracetamol, would be trying to experiment with different things like that, to legal highs, crushing up things, smoking them in, dipping letters in acid, to get, breaking down stereos, wrapping up things in carbon fibre paper to try and get through scanners, all sorts of different ways they're trying to get in. And then when it's in, it causes havoc for people who are in addiction or whatever, who take it and can't pay for it, to the wars that come from that and the violence that flows from that, and then just to the gangs competing for control in the market within the prison. Because life becomes a lot easier if for a person who's able to control that. Getting and obtaining drugs seems to be the biggest source of conflict. One of the things that concerned me with prison was that guys who smoked weed or cannabis were given the same disciplines as people who smoked heroin. Now the problem is in prison for drug testing, because everybody's drug testing, if you're found to have a illegal substance in your system, you're punished for that. So you would get the same punishment for heroin as you would for weed. Now, weed stays in your system within the test for 28 days, heroin for just a couple. So guys had an incentive to just take the heroin so they wouldn't be caught up in the prison system monitoring. And then we're going out to a heroin habit, which led to the crime rate going sky high. And then people who would have just wanted to smoke a joint or a bit of weed would start taking that, which would then compound their crime, and then just a cycle of in and out, prolific offending. And that for me seemed to be like a strange way of creating a real problem. But also the culture of it now becoming almost like a mental health ward, in the sense that everybody's monitored, everybody's looked at, and everybody seems to be encouraged to be going on to medication, which seems to be making it a strange place.
How did you get involved in the world of crime?
I was brought up on the outskirts of Edinburgh, in the east coast of Scotland. Quite a good upbringing, stayed in a kind of semi-rural place, good family, but I was a bit of a wayward one. Caught up in the gang culture outside of Edinburgh quite an early age. Gradually that got worse, and it moved to areas like Craigmillar, Niddrie, worse areas across Edinburgh as I started to get deeper, more involved in the gang scene. I had a pretty nihilistic view, on life. Get what you can, while you can, when you can. We're here for a short time, so may as well make the most of it, and taking shortcuts in that area. Got involved in robberies, smash and grabs, anything basically to enhance a criminal status and reputation that would make it easier to continue making money and keep myself safe in those areas. I wouldn't say there was anything in those areas that caused it, but they certainly compounded it, made it worse. High poverty, a lot of the addiction, a lot of the crime that flows from those areas it makes it worse. It makes it a breeding ground for the kind of things we're involved in. The areas outside Edinburgh, particularly Craigmillar, Niddrie, Wester Hales, are areas that certainly, I wouldn't say caused me to go down a dark path, but the areas that compound it: high crime, high addiction, lots of drug dealing, lots of gang syndicates and stuff like that in the area. It becomes about survival and security, getting things like money, status and safety in those areas become more important than trying to pursue education.
How do gangs operate in Edinburgh?
Edinburgh just now is particularly torn apart by gang divisions, and it's not like a kind of a gang setting you have in other areas which is determined by geography. In Edinburgh it'd be more determined by criminal syndicates, so gangs of friends that might be from across the city, but different networks of people that stay together, all about making and maintaining as much of the drug market across the city. And some of these rivalries and divisions, they go way back to when people were kids over silly things, but now as they're older it's leading to death, murders, and control really the drug market. Other things like robberies and things like that may be there, but the real competing is for the money in that area. And things that are important are always things like status, being able to make money. That would help somebody advance in that life, but also somebody who's particularly violent or feared or has a reputation for that, they can excel in that career.
What was your part to play in the gang?
I was quite young when I was involved in it. My role would have been bringing people together, really. I was part of a group of friends that controlled most of the crime in the area, and I've gone on to continue in that. My role was one of living for loyalty and belonging in part of a gang culture, and seeing the necessity to being loyal to my tribe, loyal to my camp, my boys, has been everything, and being able to back that up and stand for what you said and believed, as well as living for money and stuff like that. The norms are dictated by loyalty, or they should be anyway, of not informing. That's a major part of moving in that scene, is not being a grass, not informing on your friends, taking your rap, demonstrating loyalty by not giving even your enemies away was critical. There was an old saying, snitches got stitches. We've seen that often, particularly in prison. That was often a place when somebody went in that something they had done would come out of the woodwork where they had informed on somebody and whatnot, and there was often stitches for that.
What were the crimes your gang committed?
Crimes would involve like stealing cars, taking cars that were brand new. I remember from being a teenager doing that. As soon as anybody left the keys in the car, we would take them, and they had different shops that could make money from those stolen cars, right through to friends that dealt drugs, that moved drugs, that sold them, smash and grabs, going through shops, taking walls out of shops and taking everything from cigarettes to cars to motorbikes, anything. I remember like a credit card fraud we were doing at the time. It was like £50 guarantee cards, and we would go to the horse racing and place bets with these £50 guarantee cards, and you were always winning because, or sometimes if you just wanted to get your £50 back, you can go and back non-runners, and we'd make thousands, or we'd have checkbooks with these and sign cheques for thousands of pound paintings at the side of the track and stuff like that. That one stood out because it was just a licence to print money across the city and abroad.
How did you eventually end up in prison?
I had moved out of my parents' house when I was 16, and I was living in a place on the outskirts of Edinburgh called Mayfield, right involved in the gang scene at this point. And at the time, my friends got involved in an argument with what we call the older team, an older mob in the area who had been there. And now one of these guys had cut one of my dad's friends. He'd slashed him across the face, and I had let it be known that I was going to respond to this at the time, and a kind of hostilities began. And it transpired that they began to make their way towards my house, my flat, but my friend and I went to collect 2 samurai swords, and we came from my house, defending where I was, out into the street. Now there was 4 of them, but it turned out that the 2 guys who were brothers had been drinking that day quite heavily, and so I cut them off on the way to my flat with these swords. And I can remember taking these swords and thinking, or at least hoping at the time, that they would see that and they would run, but it transpired that the guys had been drinking that day, and they thought that they were running into golf clubs, so they would just take the first hit and get in about it with what they had. But 2 of the other guys bolted, and the 2 brothers stayed at the time, and I remember the guy running out to grab it, and I brought the sword down, severed fingers, really badly lacerated his chest, slashed the face, missed an artery by millimetres in his head, nearly killed this guy, catastrophic injuries. That led to a 10-year sentence for me at 17, which was a first offence. I was sent to Her Majesty's Young Offenders Institution Polmont, which is a place for every young offender in Scotland above the age of 16 and under the age of 21.
How was your time at the Young Offenders Institution?
So, weirdly as it sounds, you're kind of prepared, or you anticipate spending time in prison if you're involved in the gang scenes. And so that wasn't a shock, but I can remember things going from bad to worse for me, and I didn't care. I'd pushed the self-destruct button on my life, and so the violence went from having quite a violent life leading to prison, going into prison, violence got a lot worse. Particularly in Young Offenders Institution Polmont, because the gang scene amongst the young offenders is much worse than in the adults. Honestly, I'm thinking if I'm doing time, I'm going to do it well in the sense of being a solid criminal, as strange as that sounds, not taking a back seat, not taking a backward step, not complying what the system was offering. It led to months and months in solitary confinement, attacks on prisoners, attacks on prison officers, being restrained, being reclassified as one of Scotland's most violent prisoners, being continually kept on your own, handcuffed to prison officers everywhere I went. Things got pretty bad inside, from bad to worse. When leaving a criminal background in the gang syndicates, going to prison, it is almost a rite of passage. It is almost an initiation. You've been seen, you've been tried, you've been tested, you've not broke, and how you hold yourself within prison is very important as well for how you are seen and how you represent yourself going out. And so I made that conscious decision to not take a back seat and to make sure I went forward in prison, and that was strangely through violence.
How violent were you at the Young Offender Institution?
The Young Offenders Institution in Polmont, again, from everybody, it was the worst place. It was hell on earth, honestly, because every prisoner from the whole of Scotland was there, and so in a strange way, although outside the crime syndicates weren't determined by geography, in there they were. So it was an Edinburgh camp, a Glasgow camp, a Dundee camp, a Falkirk camp, from all these different parts of Scotland, and it was fiercely territorial and fiercely violent. I seen a guy getting slashed over Connect 4, the game, with the top of a tuna tin. Do you know what I mean? Like, stuff was kicking off all the time, and particularly with young guys who feel like they've got something to prove. It was pretty bad. No effort was made to kind of engage or change at that point. I remember when I first went into Polmont, I went into the downgrade hall, which is like where they put all the worst of the worst from all the different wings, and so straight away going into that, I went straight into carnage basically. It was constant stabbings, constant slashings, beatings by prison officers. There was actually a report done by the HM Inspectorate in 2004 that condemned completely the conditions of Polmont, because even if you were in solitary, you would go in, and as well as having the punishment of solitary, they used to come in and take our beds away at 7 o'clock in the morning, take your chairs away, so you'd have to stand up for the full day between 7 AM and 5 PM. A lot of the practices that were condemned in the old prisons still got away with in the Young Offenders Institution. And the prison officers in there were a bit strange as well, because a lot of them had come from the adults' establishments for reasons perhaps that were a bit corrupt or a bit heavy-handed, and so we ended up having the best of prison officers as well. Looking back, it almost feels like a different person. I was consumed with anger and hate, and I would see any opportunity to retaliate. I felt as if conforming to the system was the wrong thing to do, and so fighting or not being or taking perceived disrespect, whether it be from other prisoners or prison officers, led to me reacting violently, attacking prisoners, attacking prison officers, and when you do that, it gets a lot worse. Your prison sentence gets worse. It got to the stage where I was classified as a dangerous prisoner, where you don't see anybody except 3 prison officers who take you to exercise by yourself. And it was weird, they would radio down the corridor to clear the way if you were going past and stuff like that, but the attacks were happening all the time. I remember one time I'd attacked a prison officer and they broke my wrist here and this bone was coming out, so they had to take me out to the hospital and they put like a brace on, and on this brace I took the metal out as soon as I got back from the hospital, sharpened it and then used it to attack another prisoner who I was arguing with on the way back. So it was like violence on the way back from violence. My hands were always, and this was terrible for like family coming to see me. They would, every other person had a time with their family. I was sitting with 2 prison officers literally chained to me at the time because violence was happening all the time from me. I was attacking people non-stop.
Why were you eventually moved to HMP Glenochil?
The prison governor wrote a letter to the Scottish Executive and said we can no longer keep this prisoner, he's too violent, he's too volatile, he needs to be moved out of the young offenders and into the adult establishment. And so at the age of 19, you're meant to be, if you remember, in Polmont from 16 to 21, I was kicked out at 19 into the cons, as we call it, the convicted prisoners, over 21s. So among the adults now, but I was moved to Edinburgh for a short period of time at HM Prison Stockton before I went to Glenochil. Honestly, the thing that's going through my mind as I'm leaving Polmont is that it's not going to happen. I was like so anxious to get out of Polmont and get out of the young offenders institution that I was worried something was going to go wrong. And I remember when I was leaving that day, and still looking back, it sounds weird to say it, you know, but still looking back, Polmont was that awful that leaving there was one of the happiest days of my life.
Did you spend any time in solitary confinement?
At the start of my prison sentence, it was really volatile. One of sustained solitary confinement, like 15 months in solitary is what I managed to rack up at one point, and that was like out of 2 years. And so out of my 2 years in the young offenders, I was 13 months in solitary, and then another 2 months in solitary confinement in the adults. So a lot of time alone. And then, if I was going to be honest, I used to actually prefer the solitary to having to engage with other prisoners. So I started to pine for wanting to be alone, and so sometimes I found myself probably reacting to do something to be in the easier way of living, which was by myself. And that's a dangerous place to be when you just want to be by yourself, do you know what I mean? Because it's not good. Sustained sort of solitary isn't good. It was actually while my friend had been stabbed. Anybody that thought to have any connection to this stabbing, friend or foe, was taken back to solitary for investigation. The digger is what we called it in Scotland, it's solitary confinement in Scotland, and that's, you know, it's like 12-foot high concrete walls on top, big light down on you for most of the day, small window that looks out onto razor wire over razor wire, and then when you're taken for exercise, you're taken into 12-foot high walls, a grill over the top, razor wire that surrounds you, which is basically like a glorified kennel. And you're not seeing anybody at all within that. You're totally disconnected from other people, unintentionally so. Even to when you're moved in the middle of the night to a different prison establishment to keep you as disorientated and therefore planning as little disruption as possible. I was eventually threatened by what we call the ghost train in prison, which is where you're taken from solitary to solitary to solitary in different prison establishments, moved after 3 months of a time. And you don't see anybody except the 3 prison officers who open your door, take you for 1 hour's exercise by yourself and bring you back. That's called the ghost train because when you get off it, you're spooked. Do you know, you're no longer the same guy you were when you went on it, because some cons would be on that for like 4 and 5 years at a time. You know, 4 and 5 years of sustained solitary confinement and what is basically a glorified kennel. You're there for that 3 months, and then in the middle of the night they move you to another prison, don't tell you or your family where you're going, so you can be in Greenock one day and in Aberdeen and the next day, and moved around the country within the different establishments in the Scottish prison system. So, and like I was saying, you guys can rack up 4 and 5 years on the ghost train, so you're spooked when you get off, you know.
What made you turn your life around?
Within the solitary cells in Glenochil, that I would say I had a spiritual experience of Christ that changed me in such a way as I'll never be the same. For example, when my friend was taken in the cell and stabbed, he was stabbed in the body, he was stabbed through the hands, and he got really badly stabbed on the cut at the top of his head. But when I seen that he was set up, I had ran down the wing to grab him out of the cell, and I can remember the blood was pumping out his head so much that I had to rip the bed sheet then and there, make a bandage, tie it around his head, and like I was saying earlier, you know, my mindset from the gang mentality was you didn't even want your worst enemy to go to the police. You wanted to deal with things yourself, so you wanted the people around you, so you got rid of all the evidence and whatnot so you could deal with it yourself. I remember when I went to go and grab a bucket and mop in this one instance, I came back. Now the guy I knew who'd set my mate up with the stabbing, you know, he thought he was going for a one-on-one, but when he walked into the cell door, closed, the guy grabs him from behind, starts stabbing him. He's now in the cell and he's adding insult to injury. And I can remember I had taken the blade off of my mate at this point. And so, remember right before I went to take this guy's life as he was bad-mouthing my mate, I turned around to look at my mate who's getting weaker and weaker in front of me. You know, he's bleeding from the body, and I remember the blood had soaked through the top of his head, and his side's pierced, and then his hands was pierced from being stabbed through the hands, and that actually stopped me killing a guy that day, because he just looked, I knew it was my mate Mark, but he looked so much like Jesus, it stopped me taking a man's life and never getting out of prison that day. And it sent me down a different path, which was education in prison, and yeah, I've never looked back since then, really. The path, of course, for me after that was trying to renounce everything about the gang mentality and mindset that I could, you know, that you had to react. You couldn't show that not being able to show weakness was wrong, stuff like that, and really having my whole mindset turned around, like to see that the gang mentality that I thought was keeping me alive and keeping me safe, realising that was actually killing me, and that was actually leading me further into darker places, a darker mindset, and into darker associates and relationships, and my life because of that reflected it. So trying to renounce that, get away from that mindset was only helped through education, really. And I was grateful for the education department in Polmont for being able to just focus on studies and know on navigating the gang scene.
What was it like returning to society after prison?
I left prison on 16th of June 2008 after 5 years inside, and getting out, although I had spent a little bit of time in an open estate in Northside, which was an open prison. I'd only been there a couple of weeks, and so it was a real shock from going from a maximum security prison kind of lifestyle, all that time in solitary confinement, to just going back out into society. It was weird. Meeting people and just engaging with people, and you know, even things like just trying to get a job and stuff like that, again, when you've got a conviction that can never be spent, no matter how you try and change it, and things like that. But I've been glad and been able to press on and not go back. There's been mistakes and been difficulties and whatnot, but I'm thankful I've never been back to prison since. I left my home in Edinburgh to come to Glasgow to study theology, and it was while studying theology I met my wife, and now have my family down on the west coast of Scotland. If I can be honest, my goals were to try and contribute back into society, genuinely give something back. I'd spent so much time involved in hate and anger that I genuinely wanted to make a difference, and I've been privileged to do that, do you know what I mean? I've worked with disabled kids in Albania, orphans out there, stuff like that. I give talks to schools, go around to certain young gangs and stuff like that within school settings, as well as go back to speak to other prisoners and stuff, which is in some way just try to stop. So many of my friends are dead, man, do you know what I mean? So many are doing lifers just now, so many are just stuck in a life of hell, that being able to be some part to try to help stop that is a goal. My life just now is, during this season particularly, is focusing on family and being a father and having a happy life, free from crime. But I do enjoy writing. Published a book back in 2016 about my life in prison and being Scotland's most violent prisoner. And now the change is, you know, life is hopeful now. Do you know what I mean? I'm not living in fear or anxiety or looking over my shoulder. Nobody's coming to get me, and I can look forward to just living a peaceful existence with hopefully making a difference and doing a little good, hopefully, at the end of it.
Thanks for watching our interview with Anthony Gielty on what life in HMP Glenochil is really like. Remember to click the subscribe button below, as it really helps the channel grow. Tell us in the comments section if there's a British prison you want to see next. This is Matt from Underworld Uncut. We'll see you next time.